Okay, so 3 types of glazes in this class. We have underglaze, we have paint on glaze, and we have dipping glaze. Dipping can also be pouring, and very rarely do we paint on with dipping glaze, but you can. Now, what is the main difference between underglaze and a paint on or a dipping glaze? Yeah.
You can put underglaze on before you misfire it.
Okay, you can put underglaze on before you can misfire it. And why is that important to know? Or what about it that is important to know?
Because would whatever the paint on, whatever glaze, would that slide off if you already fired it?
No, because the way the stuff we buy, you can put on before and after, and we're going to clarify that.
Does that have to do with the temperature of it?
It doesn't have to do with the temperature, although, no, it doesn't. There's no although. Because our underglazes you can fire from 1700 degrees all the way up to about 2300 degrees. Okay, if we're doing something else right now, let's pay attention to this. That's the kind of stuff you do before you come back to class. Underglazes have little or no glass former in them. Okay, so they can go on before and after, the ones we buy. Some underglazes can only go on after, some can only go on before. Ours can do both. But little or no glass former, which means it's not going to be shiny when it comes out. Now, as we have the underglazes, just point this back in this direction. There's not a whole lot of instruction on them, but basically it says, or I'm just telling you, you paint it on. 1 coat is pretty much sufficient if the underglaze seems a normal thickness. Normal thickness is like heavy cream. It's not like super goopy, and it's not like super runny. But if you remember, they don't look the same, right? That's pink, but it says it's going to be red. Okay, because it has to be fired twice and a clear glaze put over it to make it that bright of a red. If you were to fire it once and not clear glaze it and fire it again, it will go a darker red, but it will not be that bright because the clear helps to kind of magnify that. So we have our underglazes. Now, there's some things that you need to understand about underglazes and what you have options of doing. If you paint on before and fire it and it comes out, and then all you do is clear glaze it, your underglaze should be pretty shiny because the underglaze is centered to your piece. Okay, but if you got your piece out today, where's the piece? So we got a piece here. We have a piece out today. So this is a piece that has underglaze on it, and it's been fired. So that underglaze is centered to that. I can't scratch it off, okay? But if I take this piece and I underglaze it today, and then I clear glaze it, it is not going to come out as shiny as you think it might. So let's restate that at least one more way. So when we fire, the clay becomes centered. It becomes glass-like. And so when I put an underglaze on and then fire it, that underglaze becomes part of that fired piece. Okay? If I were to go back and grab a underglaze right now and paint this on, they're separate. It's still kind of that chalkiness, you all know what I'm kind of talking about, on the surface, and I can wipe it off. They're not the same. And so if this is fired and I clear glaze it, it's going to come out super shiny, like the clear glaze is supposed to. But if I put a lot of underglaze on this one, it's not going to come out shiny. So this isn't the best example, but I'll pass this around. This green went on before. Okay, so before it got fired, it came out. Then I put black on it, then I wiped the black off. And so it stayed in all of my cracks. And as I pass this around, you'll see where it's black. And then I clear glazed it. I did not fire it again. So where it's black, it is a little more dull than where it's green. So pass that around and look at that. So if you have your piece, you get it out today, and you're like, I want to do some more underglaze on it. Perfect. You're allowed to. You can put it on afterwards. But you have two options. One, put underglaze on and clear glaze it. And then what's the shininess going to be? Is it going to be really shiny? It's going to be less than shiny, or semi-gloss. Okay, so let's revisit this. You have your piece. It's been fired. If I put underglaze on it today and clear glaze it right now, is this going to come out the shiniest or less shiny?
Less shiny.
Less shiny, because that clear glaze is sitting on top of the underglaze that's not part of the clay yet. But if you want it to be really shiny, you can put underglaze on it today, and then you need to refire it. If you clear glaze it today, it's going to be dull. So let's say I put more underglaze on here, and then I bring it in here, and I have a good example of this right here. That light color was on there before, okay? The dark color she put on today and then wiped it off. We call that antiquing, because it leaves it in those grooves. She left me a note, said, please misfire again, just like that. So I know what your intentions are, because she wants the whole thing to be really shiny. But if she just dipped it in clear glaze and put it up here, it's going to come out less shiny, right? Like that piece that's coming around, right? So it's going to come here. So if you want me to fire your piece again, you're more than welcome to do that. But you need to leave me a note, because I need to know what your intentions are. So here's an example. This is a lidded piece, and we're going to talk about lidded pieces next time. That pink was on there. It's been on, I didn't sign it, but that pink has been on there for probably a year and a half, 2 years. And I pulled this out. It was sitting up there, and I put some more underglaze on it. And then I fired again, because if I were to come in here and scratch this, that underglaze isn't going to come off. Now if I glaze it, everything's going to come out nice and shiny. Okay? Do you have any questions on that so far? Anything that's not making sense? It's okay if it doesn't. Super important that you know these things, because you're in ceramics 2. You can ask questions, but mostly you should understand what you're trying to do. So, any questions on underglaze so far? Okay. The next is our paint-on glazes. Paint-on glazes are right up here. And this is where you have to get it organized in your head. We paint on underglaze, we paint these on. They are not the same thing. And you cannot just be like, I'll just grab whatever I want and go for it. You have to pay attention to what's happening. Now, here we have our paint-on glazes. For the most part, you pick these glazes for the color. You pick one glaze and go, that's the glaze I'm going to put on. And you shake it up. Well, that was that. We need to add some water to it. You apply however many coats it says, and then we fire it. Now, the general rule, anyone remember what the general rule for paint on glazes is on how many coats? 3. Okay? So we find a glaze, we pick it. Now, if you're like, hey, do you have a glaze? I don't know. I don't know if I have them. We have lots, but they could be out. We've had most of them. Like, I don't know if I have any more blue rutile. It's almost gone. I bet I do, but actually I do right there. Okay, so 3 coats. Now, there are options for our glazes, and these options look like this. So if you look at these charts, they go across like this. If you look on the bottom here, PC30, PC59, PC62, PC31, 55, 12. Those are all the manufacturer numbers for a certain glaze. So PC12 is Blue Midnight, 55 is Chun Plum, Oatmeal, Deep Fire Brick, Tenmoku. And what they're saying here, and this is where you can bend the rules a little bit, is this is your base coat. So Deep Fire Brick is your base coat. And right here at the bottom on the left, so there's 2 sheets. On the left side, it says brush on 2 layers of the base coat, brush on 2 layers of the top coat. Okay, so it's saying if you put on 2 layers of Deep Fire Brick and 2 layers of tourmaline, you'll get that combination right there. So that's 4 layers. Okay, now some things for you. The smaller your piece, the less I want you to mess with glazes. The bigger your piece, the more likely, the more you can mess with them, because there's more surface for the piece to run, the glaze to run. But if you load up a piece that's this big with 6 layers, which you should never put 6 layers on, but let's say you do, the chance of that running all the way to the bottom, it's like 100%. Okay? Don't do it, just try to test my 100% rule. But if it's a tall piece and it runs, it has a whole lot more area to run down. Is that kind of hitting in your head? Okay. Now, if you remember what my definition of a glaze is, and if you don't remember, I'm going to tell you. It is materials mixed together, applied appropriately, fired to a specific temperature to get a desired result. It's a recipe. Okay? In Ceramics 1, we talk about cookies. Anyone remember that conversation? No. If you don't add salt to your cookies, they don't taste right. If you add too much salt, they don't taste right, right? It's the same thing here. The manufacturer says, if you mix this up, and when we mix up a paint-on glaze, always put your finger or thumb on the top. If you don't and that lid's off, it's going to spill. So if you mix that up and apply it appropriately, 3 coats, to bisque fired clay and fired at cone 5-6, you'll get something that looks pretty much like that. Okay, now, the only thing that is slightly contradictory, this one right here is PC30 Tenmoku. Where's another Tenmoku in this room? Right there, on our dipping glazes. They are not the same glaze. They are different recipes. So this manufacturer does one thing, this manufacturer does another to get similar results. So if you put Tenmoku down first, that's dipping, and here's an example right here, and put deep olive on top, you are not going to get that yellow color. It's not going to happen. Well, I don't know, it might, but I doubt it. Because the materials in that Tenmoku are not the same materials that are in this Tenmoku. Okay? Now, that Tenmoku over there works really great with combinations. So I use it a lot, and I'll put on reds and yellows and blues, and it works really well. Okay, paint on glazes. Stick to the 3-coat rule. Stick to the basics of what you want. Try not to get too fancy with your glazes. when we tend to get too fancy with our glazes, they tend to turn out less than desirable. Here's some guidelines, and then back to this again. If you come up and ask me, do we have whatever glaze, I'm going to say I have no idea. You're going to have to look, okay? Because I really have no idea. You just look in there. There are a few in here. So right here, I think these are empty, but down here there's some others, and you can use those. 3 coats, let it dry, all that great stuff. If you are going to experiment and you do say 2 coats of one and one of another, you can. Some options for you on that would be, let's say we're glazing this, and I glaze everything in 2 coats of one. I do the bottom in the 3rd coat, then I want to do the top in a different something. So I do 3 coats down here, 2 here, and then I put 1 more coat up top. That should be fine, right? Right? Okay. If the goal is to take home pieces that work or look good and are successful, like they make it out of the kiln, I would recommend not messing with glazes too far. Pick what you know and kind of go from there. I pick glazes with stability in mind first, and then looks. Okay. Stability is so important. The reason why stability is important is, as beginners and now intermediates, if you mess up the glaze, if my glaze is a stable glaze and you accidentally over dip a little bit or over pour a little bit or put 1 extra coat on because you weren't paying attention, the chance of your work, my kiln shelves, surviving is pretty good. There are glazes out there that if you over dip at all, it will run all the way to the bottom, and it's terrible. Okay, next things. Any questions on paint-on glazes? So answer me this real quick. What's the main difference between, there's 2 main differences between underglaze and paint-on glazes. What are the 2 main differences?
Underglaze doesn't have glass in it.
Okay, underglaze doesn't have a glass or glass former in it. Okay, and that's not actually true all the way. If you put underglaze on, you're not supposed to put it on the bottom, and because there is some glass former, especially in some of the darker glazes, but it's not very much. Okay, what's the other difference between the 2? And this is the biggest difference that you need to understand. Underglaze doesn't run. That's part of the glass former thing, and that's good. That's the important part. Which one goes on before it can be bisfired? Underglaze. Can it go on after?
Yes.
Yes. What are the 2 variants on if you want it really shiny or semi-glossy? So it needs to be bisfired, whether it's, you can bisfire 5 times if you want to, okay? There's not a problem with that, and people do it, lots of layers. But if you want it to be shiny, it's gotta be bisfired before you do it. If you don't care and you don't mind that it's a semi-gloss, it's still shiny but not really shiny, then you can put the underglaze on after it's bisfired and then clear glaze it today. Okay, but back to the before and after. It's so important that you realize that this glaze cannot go on before you fire it. If you do, I have to throw your piece away. Okay, so just remember that. Same with the dipping glaze. Now, before I do dipping glaze, I want to show you one thing. I'm going to come all the way over here to the sink. Sweet. Okay, so something I don't talk to many Ceramics 1 students about, and that is sanding. Sanding is not good. You should spend the time in the workable, leather hard, and bone dry stage to clean your work up so that you don't have to sand. Now, as slightly more advanced students, you can sand a little bit. Now, it's so important that you do it in this way and you follow these rules. One, I have these sanding bits, or pads, they're diamond. I should have 2 or 3 of them, but I have some more coming. And they do a great job. But I don't grab my piece, I just start sanding. Because that puts glass in the air, really super minute glass dust, that once it gets in your lungs, it won't come out. It sucks. So what we do is we come over here and we get it wet. And it's so important that you get it wet so that it knocks that glass, it holds that glass and puts it down the sink. Okay? So you're welcome to sand. Now, if you're trying to shape something, probably not. If you're trying to just take an edge off, that's a good thing. But I'm not going to come in here and be like, oh, I need to, round this whole piece out or whatever. No, I'm just taking the edge off. So my guidance here would be, this is going to take you more than, say, 30 seconds to a minute on your piece. You probably should have done it at a different stage, because that's a long time. Now, something for you here. Does everyone see the wetness of my piece? If I were to go and dip this or pour onto this right now, I'm going to have a problem. So, when we, I'm going to come back up here. When we glaze, and dip glazing is pretty easy to see this on. So I'm going to dip glaze something. Okay, nice quick stir. I'm just going to take my little bottle here and I'm going to dip it. The rule is less than 3 seconds, right? And as I pull this out here, see how it started to dry really quickly? Okay, so my question is, where's the water going? Into the piece, or is it evaporating? I would say it's going into the piece. If it was hot, yeah, it might be evaporating quick, but what happens is this bisque piece soaks up the water. Okay, so remember my piece over at the sink, I just sanded it, and there's water in it now, right? If I were to dip that, it's going to take a lot longer to dry, and it's not going to look the same when it's fired. Because, kind of like what we were talking about with the underglaze and sintering, if there's water already in there, glaze is designed that as you put it on, the materials pack into those pores. Okay, and if the piece is filled with water, there's nowhere for the glaze to kind of stick into. So if you're going to sand or clean up your piece with water, you need to wait about an hour, if not a whole day, before you finish glazing that. Okay, is that clear enough? Okay. One more thing before I do more dip glazing, and it'll be quick, is this. It's so important that you pay attention to your processes and either leave me notes. I would like you to leave me notes if there's something interesting you want to accomplish, plus talk to me. There's lots of things we can do, but if you're not talking to me, if you're not leaving me notes, I don't know. And so here would be an example. Did you take your skeleton? Where did I put it? Whatever. We'll use this. So here would be an example. Sometimes when we put on an underglaze, it goes on and it looks just like a regular glaze. Anyone ever experienced that? Right? You can't really tell the difference between the three kinds of glazes. And if you take that and put that up here, okay, underglazed, no clear glaze. What am I going to fire that to? I'm going to fire it to a glaze temperature, which is 2230 degrees. Now, it's going to come out and it's not going to be shining. Okay. But we can't reglaze it. And here's why. Right now, it's bisque fired, and again, those pores are open like this. Okay, and so when I put the glaze on there, it goes inside those pores. When I glaze fire it, or fire it to cone 5-6, those pores shrink because everything shrinks, and they're super tight. And so if I put a glaze on it, does it look like there's any place for that glaze to go in? Which means it's sitting out here, which means when I fire it, your glaze has a better chance of running off, even though it's 3 coats, 3 seconds, all of that. So important that whatever you're trying to do, you talk it through with me so I can help you. I want you to make these decisions all on your own, but at the same time, you're brand new at this. So come talk with me. Let's see if I need to clarify that. I threw out a piece just this weekend that was a great example of this, and I meant to keep it. I mean, today. I was like, oh, I should have kept it. Okay, so your pieces can only be glazed and fired at certain stages. So be mindful of where you put them, what you're trying to accomplish, and all of that. Okay, now back to dipping and pouring. You can use tongs. Now, I don't mind that you use like the white tongs with a white glaze or a light glaze and you don't clean them off. It doesn't really bother me. Just don't use red with the white because that kind of taints it. When we use tongs, we put our tongs as far down as possible. We're going to hold this like a handshake, like this, and you're going to hold it tight and nice and firm. You're just going to dip that down and pull that up. If we're pouring, it'll look something like this. That's the clear, so we'll do a clear. Put this on. Now, right now the clear is pretty low, so dipping in clear is pretty non-existent unless you have a small piece. But this is how it'll work. When it's come in here, it's okay if a little bit of this gets on there. We go through clear so fast that it won't matter. Now, as you are preparing for this, you should mix your glazes anywhere from 15 to 45 seconds. The more colorants they have, the more you need to mix them. So clear glaze mixes up super quick. Other glazes you need to mix up longer. If you show up after school or come in, say, before school to glaze, you're going to need to mix up for about 45 seconds because no one's mixed it up for a while. If you don't trust the person who mixed it up before you, you should mix it up for longer. If you've been sitting here talking, you should mix it up again. Don't just assume it's been mixed. Don't try to cut corners and save 30 seconds on glazing. Spend your time, walk through it, ask questions, right? This is a process that once you do it and put it up on the shelf, it's done. And if you're like, oh, that's not the glaze I wanted and now my piece is ugly, well, you should have thought about that before. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to pour this. And just come here and pour it down. Now when we pour, it's got to be a quick thing. Shake that off. It'll start to dry there. You should make it fairly quick. If you miss a spot, don't pour the whole thing, right? You can spot pour, or you can pull out a paintbrush, things like that. If I was to dip, say, a piece, or pour for a piece like this, I would pour into my inside first, so that I can pour it out. Then I would work on the outside. Now, if you ever get to making big pieces or bigger pieces, come find me so we can talk about how you can do that successful. There's lots of ways to make that successful. If you want to do an inside glaze, outside glaze, so two different glazes, and want them both dip or whatever, do the inside first, almost all the time. Okay. Let's see, what else do I need to cover on that? Oh, colors for today. So we have clear. Up front here, I'm calling this blue yellow, and it looks like this. So it kind of has, when it's light, it kind of has this yellow, brownish yellow look. When it's a little thicker, it goes kind of this bluish greenish look. So that's that. The one on the back is bright yellow, so it's back here, and it tends to actually dry slower. So when you dip it, it tends to take a little longer to dry. In the back is a bright blue. I couldn't find my bright blue example, but it's a bright blue. So it's a good looking color. And then Tenmoku. And Tenmoku is, it ranges, and there's a couple of things that make it range. One of them, well, let me tell you what it ranges from. So it'll range from like a burgundy that's matte to a black that's shiny. Okay, the things that make it range, the thicker your piece is, the more burgundy matte it's going to be. The lower on in the kiln, the more burgundy it's going to be. The higher up it is, it gets hotter, so it will go more of a shiny dark red or black. And if your piece is a nice thin, universal thinness, it'll go a dark color if it's up top. It mixes well with other glazes and all of that great stuff. So, any questions you have on glazes? Okay, this is that fine line. You need to know what you're doing, but you also need to ask if you don't know what you're doing. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the questions, except for the ones I just covered, and then if we were sleeping during my demo, that would suck. Anything from you? Okay, your projects that you were supposed to finish up on Friday need to be turned in by this Friday so that I can get them bisque fired. All your other projects are out. You can start to glaze those. That's what we're doing today. We haven't talked about lids yet, but some of you did some lids. Anything with a lid, if I want these to fire together, anything that touches cannot have glaze on it, on either side. Or another option would be is to wipe off the bottom here and fire that lid separate. Okay, and there's different options there. If you want to talk about it, we can. Friday, we'll start doing a demo. Tuesday, we'll do another demo on surface stuff. Thursday, we'll start some stuff and probably do some like exploratory surface stuff. That's Thursday, and then we're here Monday, then not Wednesday because that's the ACT day. So we're back on that Thursday. So we got a lot of 2-day weeks. And then we have 3 days, and that's the end of the term, I believe. So I think there's 7 more class periods to the end of the term, something like that. Don't hold me accountable on that. But the lidded containers, we're going to go to the end of the term. Then we're going to start our next project. And we have 5 class periods from the end of the term until spring break. And before spring break, we're going to turn in our projects. We're going to do either sagger firing or horsehair, and get our pieces made for those so that when we come back from spring break, we can fire those. And then we'll have 1 or 2 more projects after that, and then it's the end of the school year. Gets there pretty quick. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns? No? So the rest of the day, you are glazing. When you're done glazing, you will pick something to clean. Tools can be clean and organized. The boards over there, your tables, you can, whatever. You can pick up the aprons on the back, all of that great stuff. So, no questions? Okay, get to it. Go ahead and finish and work on glazing, turning the project. The assignment agreement sheets will be here soon.